And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Have a peaceful day.
Good morning again, Senators. When the Senate last met, we were at first reading. We will now continue the order of business at second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Kwesi Thompson.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and pleasant good morning to all of the senators. Madam President, I rise to move for the second reading and passing for a bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a body corporate to be known as the Disaster Reconstruction Authority for the function and powers relating to that authority for the designation of a disaster zone and a special economic recovery zone and for connected matters. Madam President, I am again humbled and grateful and blessed to be able to rise in this place and to speak on behalf of the people in Grand Bahama and to speak on behalf of the people in general of the Bahamas. Madam President, we again come to this place to talk about the way forward with respect to the Hurricane Doreen and now moving into a phase of reconstruction. Hurricane Doreen, Madam President, was indeed the fiercest hurricane to hit the Bahamas, which requires a response like we have never seen before in the Bahamas. Madam President, a destructive Category 5 major hurricane that sustained gusts of 185 miles an hour, matched with a tidal phenomenon, king tide, which took over Abaco and Grand Bahama. The storm surge was unprecedented, but with all that said, the complete picture, we believe, still has not yet been painted. We are still in the process of reconstruction. These conditions pounded Abaco and Grand Bahama for over 48 hours, while Doreen moved at 1 mile an hour. In some instances, stood dormant. And the ironic thing about it, Madam President, this morning I was at the Hilton Hotel and doing another presentation. And just outside, I met one of my school mates and childhood friends. I won't call his name because I didn't get permission to mention it. But I met one outside, and I joked with him. I said, he was wearing shorts, and I joked with him. I said, you look like you're on vacation. And he said to me, boy, I needed it. And like so many residents in Grand Bahama and Abaco, just a time away. And he said he was on his way back to Grand Bahama today, and he remarked, back to reality. But he was one of those who had to be rescued, and in a dramatic fashion. He's one of those who lost his house And he said he's now in between trying to, unfortunately, didn't have insurance, but he's now in between trying to find funds to pay rent and then trying to find funds to rebuild and try and take care of his family at the same time. So it is, it is stories like that that puts what you're doing into perspective, and that you're not just, you know, talking generally about a piece of legislation, but you are really talking about how do we help real people with real problems, and how do we do it in the most effective way. And I believe that's what we're here to do today. And an unprecedented storm, Madam President, requires an unprecedented response. So just as the storm was massive, it now requires the response to be equally as massive. It is often said that if we want to achieve something we have never achieved, we must do some things that we have never done. And if we are called upon to respond and to rebuild, which is something that we have never done to this, I would submit, to this scale, then we must put in place some things that we have never done before. And that really is the starting point for this piece of legislation. Also, the response must encompass the public and private sector and must encompass the coordination of the public and private sector. So this is not just the government's role in reconstruction, but this is how do we respond in a holistic and effective way, including everybody at the table. The response must be all encompassing. It must include the cleanup, infrastructure, redevelopment, city planning, home repair, home construction, fundraising, the building code adjustments, logistics, and then doing it at the same time in having in mind that another hurricane may come next year. So it is trying to rebuild with all of those things in mind and also being resilient at the same time. It also encompasses rebuilding our economy at the same time, because we could be so focused on building the buildings back and be so focused on putting the streets back and be so focused on building the homes back. But at the same time, we must also be focused on how do we rebuild the economy? How do we bring back the jobs? How do we bring back the life in Abaco? And also, how do we advance and rebuild those things in Grand Bahama? So rebuilding must also be done smarter and using technology to do so. So this morning, just before I get into the bill, with your leave, Madam President, this morning we held a kickoff workshop for the digitization IDB project, which is really one of the largest digitization projects the country has seen. The program will focus on making the government services also more resilient. Because one thing we realized in this storm was this hit Grand Bahama and this hit Abaco. But God forbid that the same kind of storm were to hit New Providence, where all of our central government offices function. And I put something to the workshop this morning to imagine, and we said God forbid, but imagine that the offices that we left yesterday in social services are destroyed. So all of the social services records are gone. Imagine the hospital is flooded. So your records in the hospital are gone. Imagine your registrar general's office. Roof blows off and water compromises all of your records. Imagine the passport office, or your national insurance board. Buildings destroyed, equipment destroyed, files gone. Well, for us in Grand Bahama and Abaco, that was a reality. And thankfully, New Providence could be the backup for us. But imagine if that hit New Providence. So when we think about our digitization program, we have to think about how do we put our services online? How do we digitize the records that we already have? Where customers can access these services and access these records from any place in the world, and all you need is a internet or a device. We must also have systems that are interoperable and prevent problems if you lose your passport or driver's license. One of the major, in fact, we passed a piece of legislation on the last occasion to do away with the expense of having to replace your passport or replace your driver's license. Well, imagine a system where you didn't have to have a paper driver's license, or you didn't have to have a paper passport, but all of your necessary government information could be accessed online, and all of your necessary government information could be accessed by other government agencies online. That is how you really rebuild being resilient, and how you rebuild smarter and using technology at the same time. Madam President, e-cabinet is also in the development stage, where we have received expressions of interest and are now assessing those expressions of interest. But a real life problem that took place during the hurricane, well, you had a number of ministers who were in who were in Grand Bahama going through the storm. You had a government minister in Abaco going through the storm, and immediately after the storm, the cabinet needed to meet in order to make essential decisions for relief, recovery, and rescue. Well, if you had an e-cabinet system, then those necessary cabinet ministers could have actually sat in a cabinet meeting while they were on the island right after the storm to be able to give essential information back, and also participate in those cabinet discussions when those important decisions are being made. Again, this hurricane made the digitization process that much more real and that much more important. The central bank is also piloting the sand dollar electronic currency and has already approved a number of electronic wallet companies. Again, why is this so relevant? Because Abaco was in a state where it had no banks. Grand Bahama was in a state where it had limited banking. But imagine you were able to do transactions, buy, sell, move funds by just using your cell phone. Imagine you were able to do that by just using your cell phone and having internet connection. When we rebuild, those are the kind of things that we also have to be thinking about. Imagine companies who can pay their employees by using their phones, send money from other islands by using their phones, buy and sell goods by using their phones. This will allow businesses the ability to rebuild using smart technology. Madam President, just to get to the details of the bill. The Disaster Reconstruction Authority is designed to allow reconstruction and relief after disasters as soon as possible. It is hoped that it will remove the red tape of government processes and enable reconstruction process to proceed efficiently and quickly. The authority shall be responsible for the management of reconstruction and restoration in areas designated disaster zones and special economic recovery zones. The current state, which is the current state of Abaco and Grand Bahama. Let's go through the bill if we can. Clause 3 establishes the authority. Just a few points to note with Clause 3 is that the authority will have the management over areas designated as disaster zones. So this authority will be zeroed in on areas that are disaster zone areas. So it's not just a very wide range that the authority will have the management over, but it is being very specific for those areas that are going to be designated disaster zones. Another significant point about the establishment of the authority is that the authority will be a body corporate. And I guess those of us who, have had a little experience with government processes and government ministries realize that there is an inherent flexibility for body corporates, for those authorities that are body corporates. They can maneuver and do some things a little bit more flexible than a government department. Clause 4 of the bill speaks to the constitution and procedure of the board. So there's going to be a board of directors for the authority, and the board shall be governed by the authority and shall perform the functions and exercise the powers of the authority. Clause 5 speaks to the functions of the authority. And I want to note in Clause 5A, where it speaks to the authority being responsible, or the function of the authority is to assess the reconstruction needs of the disaster zone and to prepare a reconstruction plan. So their focus is really on reconstruction, and it is focused on when an area is designated a disaster zone. It also has the function of overseeing the reconstruction plan and implementing the reconstruction plan. Madam President, it also speaks to establishing and coordinating relationships with national and international bodies engaged in similar or ancillary pursuits. So one thing we've realized is that for a major disaster, there has to be a major coordination. And that coordination is between locals and international persons that are coming in. So it encompasses coordinating the bodies nationally within the jurisdiction, but it also encompasses coordinating all of those NGOs, all of those different bodies and entities that want to come from outside to inside to help, which must be coordinated and must be managed. It also speaks to coordinating, and this is why I believe it's important that an authority can do this. It also speaks to coordinating government and private sector, because this is not just a government job. This reconstruction is not just about what the government is able to do, but this is about how the government is able to marshal all resources to be able to make the most effective impact. The powers of the authority are in Clause 6, and this authority has the power to enter contracts necessary to carry out the functions. It can appoint employees, and it can second other employees from the public service to be able to come and to assist, even if they come in to assist for a specific period of time. Madam President, it also speaks to the powers that will be necessary really to manage in a disaster. So working along with other government ministries, uh, it also gives them the power to remove or destroy or order the destruction of buildings, structures, vehicles, vegetation, property, for example, to carry out and to cause or to be carried out excavation, other earthworks, again, depending on what the disaster is. You would need to have that kind of authority that quickly to be able to go ahead and do certain things on a very quick basis. They also have the ability to direct persons when it comes to decontamination, also to direct persons when it comes to stopping work or proceeding with work, closing down premises, and shutting off water supplies. But it gives them a wide range of powers, but they will execute those powers in conjunction with other government ministries. So it is envisioned that they will have to work closely again with the Defense Force officers. They will have to work closely with the police, with other Ministry of Works, other government agencies to be able to execute their powers. The oversight of the authority will be done by the Prime Minister. The authority also will be able to establish the Bahamas National Recovery and Reconstruction Trust Fund. And the Prime Minister spoke to this trust fund, which will be set up in order to assist those residents with home repair. The Prime Minister spoke to where persons will be able to access in the range of $10,000 to repair their homes. But this is going to be a trust fund that is set up independently of the government, that the private sector will be able to contribute to, that the private sector will be able to manage, and that other agencies and other NGOs, other private sector persons will also be able to put funds in to this fund also to assist persons. The funds of the authority is in Clause 8, and it speaks to the source of those funds for the authority, which will be from Parliament, will be one portion. It will be another portion is from grants and donations that come into the authority. And then the authority also has the ability to borrow funds in accordance with Section 9, and that is with the in consultation with the Minister of Finance. Clause 8 also speaks to those funds which are being collected. And one of the things that is put into the bill is that if someone decides to donate a specific amount of money for a specific purpose, the authority then has the mandate to use those funds for the purpose for which they were donated. And that speaks to it in clause clause 8, sub 2. It then speaks to the authority having an annual budget. And they must produce the budget just as any other authority would have to do. It speaks to transparency in clause 11, where they must provide audited accounts. And so this is not an authority that can just be a law on its own, but it must be transparent. All of the accounts must be audited, and those funds, those audit reports will be produced to the minister. And I suspect, as most authorities do, those audited reports will then be made available to Parliament, which means that they will then become public. The authority in Clause 12 has the ability to hire officers and employees. And Clause 13 also speaks to the transfer of public officers into the authority. Clause 14 is the usual term that speaks to persons who might be transferred, that their pensions will also be accommodated as usual. Clause 16 speaks to the appointment of disaster zone reconstruction committees. And I just want to say a couple of words on this. The board may appoint disaster zone reconstruction committees, and there is a contemplation of where there is a contemplation of disaster or immediately after the occurrence of a disaster, then these committees can be appointed. This clause, I think, is important because it provides sufficient flexibility to meet the specific needs of a disaster. It is very difficult for you to specify what the needs will be in a disaster because each disaster is different. But what this allows you to do is to have the ability to appoint your committees, and your committees will depend upon the nature of your disaster. Because obviously, if it's, for example, an earthquake, then you need persons who can be focused on that. If it is a weather-related situation, then you may need persons who are focused on that. If it's a some kind of a contamination, then you need persons who have expertise and can focus on that. It also allows for integration of the public and the private sector to work together, which would be difficult in a structure where it is in a government department, where there are certain rules and regulations that have to be followed by the public service and so on. Only public officers are able to do certain things and so on. But what this does is this gives the board, or it gives the authority the ability to appoint the board, and it gives the board the authority to appoint committees. And those committees can be made up of public and private sector persons. But those committees will have and operate with the authority of the board and the authority of the authority. So it allows an integration of the public and the private sector to be able to do so in a real way on the ground in a disaster. This also speaks to the ability to have locals on the ground in these committees. So it gives the authority the ability to set up on the ground and to set up persons who are from those areas on those committees and give them the same power and give them the same effect as the board would have. So it empowers the local persons to also be able to have some real teeth and to be able to do some real things on the ground in those areas. It is meant that these committees will be temporary. That's very important because this is designed, in my view, it is designed for immediate response. And then for those long-term reconstruction needs, as clause 16 says, where the consequences of a disaster is of a nature that requires long-term management, the management of that disaster shall be turned over to the relevant ministries. So at where there is a longer process of reconstruction, then obviously there is the Ministry of Works, Ministry of Housing, Ministry of Health, Police. All of these ministries then shall kick in then to take over from those local committees. Because that's really what government should be doing, should be hoping to move from a point of temporary reconstruction to a point of long-term reconstruction and development. 19 speaks to the designation of disaster zones, and as we indicated, the Prime Minister has the authority to do so. 20 speaks to the assessment. That's one of the first things that they would have to do, is to get on the ground and to assess. 22 speaks to the designation of special economic recovery zones. Again, a new concept, but a necessary concept. And as the Prime Minister has already foreshadowed, that the islands of Grand Bahama and the islands of Abaco will become special economic recovery zones. And he's also spoke to the fact that there will be special concessions that will be granted in those special economic recovery zones. Again, this bill and the authority speaks to a holistic approach for the redevelopment and for reconstruction. So it's not just about how do you build back houses or how do you build back roads and power lines, and all of those are necessary, but it is also how do I build the economy back? How do I inject the necessary concessions to incentivize persons to go back and to rebuild, incentivize persons to go back and to employ, incentivize them to go back and to start again and to rebuild their economies. So 22 gives the Prime Minister the authority to go ahead and designate that, and he's already foreshadowed that that would happen for a number of years, I believe, for Abaco and Grand Bahama. The authority in 26, Clause 26, speaks to an issue that was relevant in the ability for those persons who want to come in and assist for humanitarian travel. It gives the Department of Immigration the ability to grant persons the ability to come in free of charge. It is granted for a 3-month period, and they have to again register with the authority, and so that the authority then can be able to keep track and to monitor what is happening, who is here, what are they doing, and how those things can be coordinated by the authority. The authority also serves as the focal point for coordination, and I think one of the important things also to note would be Clause 28, which speaks to the relationship of the authority with the National Emergency Management Agency, with NEMA. And the authority, if you read the bill, it really speaks to outlining a difference between immediate relief and reconstruction. And that there is NEMA's ability to continue, and the bill also speaks to certain NEMA being able to delegate certain powers over to the authority as well. But it says in 28 sub 2, where a donation is given for both relief and reconstruction, the relief portion shall go to the NEMA Emergency Management Agency, and the reconstruction portion shall go to the authority in the portion directed by the owner. So there's a distinction that's really made in that clause. It also, in 31, speaks to the ability of the minister to provide regulations. And this is again important because with legislation, if required, you have to have specific rules on how these things are managed and how these things go forward. The bill allows the minister to be able to make specific regulations. So where there are certain issues that the bill might be silent on, regulations can be put in place to give specific directions on how those things will be managed. And so it's important to note that where people may have certain questions that they may raise, the bill doesn't speak to this, what about that? The bill does give the minister the ability to go back and to look at the situation and to put in place regulations if necessary. Madam President, the bill also then speaks to the constitution of the board, proceedings of the board, how persons are appointed, time frames, and those other important issues with respect to the constitution of the bill, of the board, sorry. Madam President, as I did indicate, the bill does give the ability for the special economic disaster zones, and as we've indicated, the Prime Minister has went ahead and foreshadowed the designation of those zones and what will happen as a result of the designation of those zones. And we are very hopeful that with the designation of those zones, that it will spur economic activity as a result of those necessary concessions. The National Recovery Fund, which we expect to be put in place very shortly, and as we indicated, the fund is designed to be an independent, non-political body, and will be run by the private sector with private sector input, and will be overseen by the trustees of that fund. and persons will be able to access up to $10,000 to assist with the repair of their houses. Madam President, I believe that we must work together in a holistic approach when it comes to the reconstruction. I believe that while there will be criticisms and while there will be you know, the naysayers of the government when it comes to reconstruction, reconstruction is one of those things that is, in my view, above politics. Reconstruction also is one of those things that is in the complete national interest. And so I think as we get into the whole discussion of reconstruction, as we get into the discussion of how we do the reconstruction and how we appoint the board and how we move forward with it, it is really our collective responsibility to do it in a way that is in the best interest of Bahamians. And so I believe we all should approach it that way. I believe we all should approach it uh, unified in purpose. We may have our differences in terms of how we get to that goal. We may have our own different views on the track that we take to get to that goal. But I most certainly believe that those of us on this side, and I believe that those on the other side, want us to get to that goal. And that goal is the same. And that is to see the reconstruction of the island of Abaco, to see the reconstruction of the island of Grand Bahama, to do it in a way that is holistic, do it in a way that is beneficial to all of the people on those islands, do it in a way that's effective, do it in a way that the people will feel it as well. So, Madam President, we are of the view that this is the best means of doing it, the best means of cutting down on the bureaucracy and moving forward with that reconstruction in the shortest period of time. So, Madam President, with those words, I so move.
Thank you, Senator. Is there a second? Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jenny Isaacs Dotson.
Good morning, fellow senators. I wish to thank the Almighty God for allowing me to see another day, and again to the Most Honorable Prime Minister for this appointment and the opportunity to represent Labour in this honorable place. I wish to extend my condolences to the families of the late Colin Trotman, Justice Emmanuel Osadabe, John Chippy Chipman, Tennyson Wells, Dr. Kelsey Johnson, the Forbes family, and the family of Kenneth Knowles, and also to my own family on the passing of my brother-in-law, Vincent Pierre, especially to his children, Malika, Tammy, Jawara, Jamero, and Kenny. Madam President, on September 1st, 2019 through September 3rd, will forever be etched in the hearts and minds of all Bahamians. It was during this time that a Category 5 Hurricane Dorian touched our shores and affected our number 2 and number 3 economic islands, namely Abaco and Grand Bahama. The effects of Hurricane Dorian, Madam President, in the Bahamas was the worst experience for any natural disaster in our country's history. Hurricane Dorian struck Abaco as a Category 5 hurricane on September 1st, and a day later hit Grand Bahama at the same category. The hurricane then sat over Grand Bahama for another day, finally pulling away from the island on September 3rd. Damage is estimated at over $7 billion, and there were at least 65 deaths in the country. and a number of persons are actually still missing. I've had the opportunity to visit both islands post Hurricane Dorian, to speak to the residents, and in my own way to contribute to hurricane relief by making personal donations and working with other organizations. However, in speaking to the residents of Abaco and Grand Bahama, I truly saw the resilience of Bahamians. Despite what they have gone through, they are determined to clean up and rebuild their various communities. Despite facing what one resident called a raging, angry, like Mother Nature rebelling, tornado filled Category 5, they are in their homes cleaning up and preparing to rebuild to deal with future Category 5 hurricanes. Madam President, on both islands, the cleanup effort is in full effect. And I was quite impressed with the cleanup efforts of the government and Bahamians throughout their communities. Additionally, the government has made these areas economic recovery zones and tax and VAT-free zones for the initial 3 years. Almost up to 1.5 million has been allotted for grants, up to 50,000 for farming, fishing, and maritime. Another measure, Madam President, to support recovery and rebuilding in those zones is the establishment of a 10 million loan guarantee and equity financing program. Dr. Minnis said that this will allow qualifying Bahamian small and medium-sized businesses to secure up to 500,000 in financing to fund the restoration of businesses or the creation of new businesses. The government would also extend a VAT credit of up to 50% on the sale of real property with some conditions. Further, Madam President, the government is waiving business licenses and real property tax fees within these zones. This applies to eligible properties that are reconstructed, restored, or otherwise are inhabitable by October 2020. The Most Honorable Prime Minister said, "We will reprioritize what our commitments are and ensure that these two economic engines are restarted." Other concessions, Madam President, include the establishment of business assistance, one-stop shop on both islands, along with the extension of the provisional business license program to all businesses. The latter measure will have limited exceptions within the zones to allow for qualifying businesses to get started with their businesses within 2 business days of completed application. The center will house representatives of the Small Business Development Center, Ministry of Finance, Bahamas Investment Authority, Department of Inland Revenue, Department of Environmental Health, and building permits units of the various agencies. This center will be equipped and empowered to ensure that all existing and new businesses are able to work through any regulatory requirements within 5 working days. For the duty-free purchases of commercial items and construction materials, the government was taking steps to ensure that Bahamian wholesalers and distributors benefit from these provisions so that those who want to access the concessions will be able to buy locally. Those with approved projects in the specialized zones also will be able to buy their goods in New Providence and elsewhere through participating vendors and be able to obtain duty-free prices. Noting that the aim of this exercise was to facilitate and encourage economic activity and development, Dr. Minnis said it is foreign landholders in the Family Islands who are subject to real property tax will only qualify for this exemption if their developed properties are up to standard or if they are taking the steps to repair and refurbish their premises to get them back to standard. Madam President, I am convinced, after what I saw, that Bahamians are a resilient people, and we as a country will rebuild even better, stronger, and more determined to see Abaco and Grand Bahama return to normalcy and to their economic state prior to Hurricane Dorian. Madam President, I also stand to salute the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, the Royal Bahamas Police Force, all of the rescue workers, the nurses, the doctors, the support staff at our hospitals and clinics, local governments in Abaco and Grand Bahama, all government workers within the various agencies on those islands, the various churches, the various organizations like the Red Cross, the press, NEMA, the local, regional NGOs, private citizens who rescued many persons, the local, regional, and international organizations, and anyone that I have made forgotten, because without their help, many lives would not have been saved. Madam President, as Minister Thompson has already said, the way the government responds to the needs of our citizens has to be unique and very different. Hurricane Dorian was historical. Therefore, our response must be historic. Madam President, the Most Honorable Prime Minister Hubert Minnis also announced the government's plan to establish the Bahamas National Recovery and Reconstruction Trust Fund. Provisions for the establishment of the fund is included in the Disaster Reconstruction Bill 2019, tabled on Tuesday in the House of Assembly. Individuals will be able to receive $10,000 in assistance from the fund, and as it grows, the level of assistance will be assessed. He said this at a press conference held at the Office of the Prime Minister on November 3rd, 2019. Following that announcement, Madam President, the Disaster Reconstruction Authority and Response Bill 2019, according to the Prime Minister when he introduced the bill in the House of Assembly on November 6, 2019, said, the Disaster Reconstruction Bill 2019 represents the start of a new regime of disaster preparedness and response in the Bahamas. The Disaster Reconstruction Authority and Response Disaster Bill 2019 sets up the Disaster Reconstruction Authority, which shall be in charge of the management of reconstruction and restoration in areas designated as disaster zones. In order to rebuild Grand Bahama and Abaco, reconstruction must take place. Part 2 in clauses 3 to 18 speaks to the establishment, functions, powers, and financial provisions of the authority. Specifically, Madam President, Part 2, Clause 3 establishes this authority. Clause 5 of the bill gives the functions of the authority, which include and is not limited to assessing the needs of a disaster zone and to prepare a reconstruction plan, to oversee the reconstruction plan and implementation, to monitor and regulate and administer all matters related to the management and reconstruction work in a disaster zone, to oversee the restoration of government services in a disaster zone, to arrange the distribution of government services in a disaster zone, to construct, equip, furnish, maintain, operate, manage, secure, and repair any public property in a disaster zone for use by the general public, to establish and coordinate relationships with national and international bodies, and consult with the Minister on matters of national reconstruction policy and capital development programs in a disaster zone, and to perform such other acts as are required under this Act. Part 2, Clause 4, speaks to the makeup and procedure of the board. In the schedule, Section 3, governs the constitution and proceedings of the board of directors that will govern this authority. This board will be headed by a chairman who will not hold political office and a deputy chairman appointed by the Prime Minister on the advice of the Prime Minister. Other members of the board of directors will be appointed by the minister. A very important feature of this authority is captured in Part 2, Clause 6H, which will be to establish the Bahamas National Recovery and Reconstruction Trust Fund and the appointment of thereof. The trustees will manage the fund, and this fund will be non-political and independently designed to help with home and building repairs. This fund, Madam President, will be transparent and accountable for all to see. Miscellaneous Clause 28(1) states that the authority shall collaborate with the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, in carrying out the functions under this act. And Clause 28(2) speaks to how funds donated for relief and reconstruction will be allocated. Funds given for relief will be given to NEMA and the reconstruction portion to the authority. In working with NEMA, NEMA can delegate any of its powers within a disaster zone to the authority that it wants to. Part 4 of the bill in Clause 26 allows for a humanitarian travel authorization, which will be free of charge, granted for an initial period of 3 months, and renewable, free up to 6 months. In Part 2, Clause 6, the authority will have the power to accept, deposit, and act as a trustee and manager of any donation, endorsements, gifts, or bequests for the purpose of reconstruction of a disaster zone, entering into contracts and appointing employees as it considers necessary. Part 2, Clause 8 speaks to the authority being funded by sums allocated by Parliament, sums arising from grants, covenants, donations, and other receipts from persons, including national and international bodies. Also, sums borrowed in accordance with Section 9, which requires the approval of the minister in consultation with the Minister of Finance. If, of course, this bill does not capture everything, as no bill, I think, does, the minister can put in place regulations that deals with the same. Madam President, in conclusion, this Disaster Reconstruction Authority Bill 2019 deals very specifically with reconstruction in designated disaster zones. This bill will ensure that reconstruction in these zones are done more swiftly and proficiently. As a country, we must face up to the fact that climate change is alive and well. And we must therefore, as a small island state, be prepared for the challenges of future hurricanes. This bill is a stepping stone to ensure that as a country we can rebuild. This bill is what we as a country need to make it necessary changes based on Hurricane Dorian. Implementing this bill will help in future disasters to ensure that the red tape and bureaucracy of government is not a deterrent to reconstruction. Madam President, I stand here today to second and support the Disaster Reconstruction Bill 2019.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a body corporate to be known as the Disaster Reconstruction Authority, for the functions and powers relating to that authority, for the designation of a disaster zone and a special economic recovery zone, and for connected purposes. As many? Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jo Beth Colby Davis.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, as always, I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute and speak in this place as a voice for many Bahamians. Madam President, before I begin my contribution, I wish to raise in this honorable place a formal objection regarding the matter of the communication by the AG. Madam President, it is clear that the convention state there should be no controversial material in a communication and nothing that invites debate. However, on Monday past, ignoring the conventions and rules, the PLP was ambushed and accused of things that it never did or said. I was further surprised and could not believe that the Vice President, in accordance with practice, allowed the communication and then allowed the Senate to be suspended without, in the interest of fairness and opportunity to hear the other side. As a result, I wish to now controvert what the AG said. Unfortunately, he is not here, but it's a government statement and not personal to him, just as the PLP statement was not personal to Senator Mitchell. The communication alluded to suggest that the PLP lied or misled the Senate in a statement, and that is incorrect and not true. Further in the communication, it was suggested that the PLP called the president a pawn of the executive, and that is just not so, and a false interpretation of the matters raised. The AG spoke to some corrupted effort in relation to Hurricane Matthew, and I am certain he knows better throwing aspersions where it has not been proven. Lastly, no one on this side is trying in any way to assassinate the character of anyone in this Senate. The matter raised on this side is purely related to an apparent conflict, not whether Madam President is capable. As a result, Madam President asks for these reasons that the communication be struck off the record in this honorable Senate. Madam President, I now move to the Disaster Reconstruction Authority bill. I would say at the onset, I agree with Senator Thompson that we on this side want to see the successful reconstruction of Grand Bahama and Abaco. And I stand today to bring contributions to the Disaster Reconstruction Authority Bill 2019. But let me state that there's absolutely no way the opposition will support this piece of legislation. What is happening here is not just a rookie mistake, but the same administration that claimed in 2017 it's the people's time, but the people are suffering, lost, and angry at this F&M administration. 2 years post-Irma, and the Ragged Islands continue to be a wreck even after all of the promises from the F&M to rebuild. I ask, is that the fate of Bahamians affected by Dorian as well? Madam President, just over 2 months after the devastation named Dorian hit the islands of Grand Bahama and Abaco, we find this government struggling to figure out whether to go left or to go right. Madam President, it is as if they are at a T-junction with a line of cars behind them, the cars being the Bahamian people, blowing their horns loudly and profusely begging the government to move off the junction as the light is green so that they can proceed in the direction they are going. However, this government, 2 months after Dorian, is lost, confused, and don't know what to do. So what do, Madam President? They throw together some legislation that usurps authority across various ministries and departments. They come to the House and the Senate continuously debating legislation after legislation and don't move with haste in correcting what is truly important, that is bringing relief, real, true relief on the ground to the people that matter and that were affected. Madam President, we were just here a week ago debating another useless piece of legislation that the opposition did not support because it was again unnecessary. And here we are again engaging in yet another debate for the creation of an authority that adds more red tape and more bureaucracy to an already bureaucratic system. Madam President, I echo our colleagues in the other place and state, if there is a problem with NEMA, fix the problem. Madam President, it is not sufficient for those on the governing side to tug on the emotions of those in society by playing recordings from the affected persons during their speech in this place, because we all heard the cries and we're all heartbroken by what many suffered. However, the storm has passed. Don't create another disaster with our government agencies. Fix NEMA. Madam President, it is not sufficient for those on the governance side to stand with their fancy speeches about how damages and ravages of Dorian are personal and emotional to them, because we all have family and friends that were affected. Additionally, the damage experienced on those islands are emotional and personal to us all. So again, I say that the storm has passed. Don't create another disaster with our government agencies. Fix NEMA. Madam President, it is not sufficient for those on the governance side to scream from the mountaintop that the PLP is playing politics, because not everyone that were affected feel as if this government has done or is doing everything in their power to bring normalcy back to their lives. So the opposition speaks for all Bahamians, inclusive of those persons who feel neglected by this F&M administration. Therefore, I state again, the storm has passed. Don't create another disaster with our government agencies. Fix NEMA. Madam President, we must get things right. In getting things right, this government must be willing and able to listen and accept the criticism. So some issues with this legislation, outside of the fact that I think it's unnecessary, because you can just fix NEMA, is firstly, this bill is laced with conflict and confusion. And the impression I form, Madam President, is that this government has been making rookie mistakes and created so much confusion following the passing of Dorian. It's as if they are amateurs, unable to identify their head from their tail, running around like headless chickens, just creating new ministries and authorities. Like Oprah said, you get a ministry, you get a ministry, we all get a ministry, but without any clear assurance as to whether this legislation is necessary, functional, or practical. However, Madam President, I advise this F&M administration that a bigger or larger government is not the answer. In fact, the answer to moving this country forward after the disaster of this magnitude is having a more effective and productive government, one that is ready on day one. Madam President, I am further concerned with the duplication of the government agencies and overlapping responsibilities. And I ask the question, can someone from the governance side please explain to me the purpose or the relevance of NEMA? Because it doesn't appear they are relevant from this legislation. Madam President, for a moment, let us go to the bill. At clause 6, the bill grants the Reconstruction Authority the power, A, to accept, deposit, and act as trustee and manager of any gifts, donations, endowments, or bequests for the purpose of reconstruction of a disaster. However, under Section 34 of the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act, NEMA has the power to operate bank accounts and to receive and disperse monies held in those accounts. The funds for those accounts consist of money supplied by Parliament and donated by persons. Further, Madam President, the draftsman tried to clear this apparent conflict up at Clause 28, subsection 2, and provided that where a donation is given for both relief and construction, the relief portion shall go to NEMA and the reconstruction portion should go to the authority in the proportion as directed by the donor. And where there is no direction, it shall be equally divided. However, Madam President, I find this to be an interesting and impractical solution. How will the government effectively manage this commingling of funds and ensure the authority and NEMA are being properly funded? And all of this is only brought about by the creation of an unnecessary organizational structure, or disorganizational structure for that matter, and an attempt to construe the slightest of differences between the authority and NEMA. Madam President, I go further. Section 3, subsection 6 of the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act provides for the appointment of a consultative committee in each settlement, town, area, or district to assist the director of NEMA and administrator in formulating disaster preparedness measures, and in discharging the functions of NEMA in respect of the settlement, town, area, or district. However, Madam President, Clause 16 of this bill provides that the board may appoint a disaster zone reconstruction committee when there is contemplation of a potential disaster or immediately after the occurrence of a disaster that is a larger scale or in complex in nature. Madam President, here again appears to be the duplication of efforts. And frankly, this can only cause further confusion. On the one hand, we have NEMA appointed a consultative committee, and on the other hand, the authority in the bill is appointing another committee. To further complicate things, Madam President, I also note that there are no qualifications or maximum minimum number of persons given for such committee. As such, I query exactly how many persons can be appointed to this committee and what skill set is required by those on the committee. However, I accept Senator Thompson's explanation of the qualifications being relevant to the type of disaster. That makes sense. So I agree with that explanation. Is it necessary for the committee to be a resident of the affected area? Why has this been left open-ended? And why is there no defined role in this bill for the consultative committee? Madam President, I am even more confused by Clause 28, subsection 1, where it states it to be mandatory for NEMA to collaborate with the authority, and 2, Clause 28, subsection 3, which grants the director of NEMA to delegate any or all of its functions within the disaster zone to the authority where they determine appropriate. When this draft was being considered, I query, Madam President, under which circumstances does the government consider this transfer of powers by NEMA to the authority a desirable or necessary? The government should note, amidst all of this confusion, that the functions of the director of NEMA exceeds those of the authority as relates to disaster preparedness and relief. So why is there a provision for the director of NEMA to transfer such powers? Further, Madam President, there remains to be no line of demarcation drawn between the recovery of obligations of the director of NEMA and the authority, which leads me to my last point of contention. Madam President, I query, can the government honestly guarantee to the Bahamian people that there will be no political influence or interference with this authority? In this place and the other place, those on the government side likes to cry, the PLP playing politics. However, I am certain the Bahamian people will agree with me that this government is the only one playing politics and wasting our time. Madam President, I ask, why does the minister have to give directions of a general nature to the authority as stated in Clause 29? Why secure this overriding power for the minister? Further, Madam President, if you look at the schedule attached to this bill, you can almost round it off and say the majority of the board will be appointed by either the Prime Minister or in consultation with the minister responsible. So where's the assurances that there would be limited or no influence or interference by the government to the authority? It just seems the more things change, the more they remain the same under this F&M administration. However, instead of getting on with bringing relief, this government is wasting more time, more manpower, more resources in creating redundancy after redundancy. And while Dorian has been described as the greatest disaster to the world, Madam President, I am convinced that this F&M administration will go down in history carrying the same title and headline. To describe by visuals what a confused group they are, I created this graphic to honestly show the mess that has been created. Yes, it says, Menace administration, effective or bureaucratic? Look at this. Efficient or bureaucratic? Thank you very much. Look at this. The government Coordinators for Grand Bahama, you have Social Services, you have Ministry of Works, Defense Force, NEMA, Ministry of Disaster Preparedness Management, Reconstruction, Disaster Reconstruction Authority, the local NGOs, local government, coordinators for Grand Bahama, international agency, all zigzag and confused and not sure what's happening. Madam President, just look at it. You have Grand Bahama and Abaco and all the connected keys in the middle of all of this. And honestly, persons just truly want relief, recovery, and rebuilding. However, this government is only bringing confusion, frustration, and bureaucracy to an already difficult time. Who is managing who? Who is instructing whom? Which agency is the first point of contact? Who is the official authority in charge? When should you go to NEMA? Who directs social services and the Defense Force? What is the desired end result of all of this bureaucracy? Madam President, while this minister's administration assumed they are creating efficiency, it has unfortunately added another layer of bureaucracy, and I am afraid we will not be able to recover from this if they continue down this road of appointing this one, creating that authority, but not getting to the real issues, some of which are, what is the official death toll to date? How many persons are confirmed missing to date? Do we have the same number of persons missing across all agencies? That is, the social services records match that of the police? How many death certificates have been issued to families of persons whose bodies have yet to be discovered? Madam President, I recall reading a statement where the AG said the government would issue death certificates expeditiously. So how many, if that is so? And are these numbers being added to the death toll? I see in today's paper the government planned to have a ceremony for people swept away by Dorian. So are these persons now included in the death toll, or are they still listed as missing? When can we expect reconstruction of all government buildings that were destroyed during the hurricane? And what is the expected time for when those affected Bahamians can move into the temporary tent city you're building? We don't want to hear weeks, we don't want to hear soon. What is the date, and will it be before Christmas? Madam President, there are many more questions that are lingering in the minds of many Bahamians. And it is known in the Bahamas that we have a history of duplicating government agencies and creating redundancies instead of correcting existing inefficiencies. Further, Madam President, there is an unstated point obviously being made by the government, which is that the existing agencies and departments are not responsive, suitable, and/or capable of mounting a recovery effort. However, instead of conducting a proper analysis of the reasons for these apparent disabilities in the system, this government has chosen to take the convenient path of creating another organization that will be funded from the consolidated fund, replicating much of what NEMA was created to do. Madam President, nothing in this legislation can bring me to a point where I can support the bureaucracy this government has created. Madam President, by the mere fact we are debating this legislation, it is evidence enough that this government thinks NEMA is inefficient or ineffective. And while they are positioned with an opportunity to do what is necessary to fix the inefficiencies, they do the unthinkable and create another layer of confusion. And for this reason, added to the many laid out throughout my contribution, I do not support this bill. I end.
As many? Well, hold on. I think I recognize Senator the Honorable Mildred Hall Watson.
Madam President, I rise to Madam President, I rise to give a clarification on the comments and statements that were made by our previous speaker, Senator Davis. First, I would like to say that I think we all heard that Senator Davis indicated that there is a significant amount of bureaucracy where we have layers and layers of committees where and ministries where things are simply duplicated. But I am glad that she was able to make that statement because of our 45 years of independence. The party that she represents was in government for 35. So therefore, it seems like that is a policy that is very consistent with what they do. Okay, so, but as my point of clarification, during the debate in the Senate on Monday, the AG, leader of government in this place, read a document referring to comments which had been made by the opposition relative to the activities of Madam President in Grand Bahama for the work that she did during the initial recovery period. And when we consider that she led a grouping that was focused on feeding people, and that amounted to distributing 20,000 meals a day. For someone to have said, I will not assist you in feeding these hungry people, I think would have been devastating when she seemed to have been the person who was most qualified to lead this act. The Honorable Senator Davis stood to speak in disagreement with some of the comments made by the AG. The AG simply informed the senator that if she wanted to table something, then as is appropriate, this place was to give notice, and she would be able to do so as she should. To state, and according to the minutes of that day, which was Monday, she agreed that that is what she would be prepared to do. So to state that the chair allowed the Senate to be dismissed without clarification is absolutely incorrect, and therefore I stand to clarify that that did not occur without her agreeing to present her comments against the AG's comments at the following meeting and not that
That's the
day.
thing. I didn't agree.
Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President, if I could just wait for a brief moment to
Please,
correct the
we
statement made.
no. Please take your seat, Madam Jobeth. Now, our policy has been in this Senate that when anyone is making a presentation, I allow the presentation to be made without point of order, point of order, point of clarification. And so the good senator asked me for a point of clarification, which I have allowed. But we are finished with that point, and I am now recognizing the next speaker, which is the Honorable Jay Dorsett.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, it is my pleasure to rise in support of the legislation before us for the Disaster Reconstruction Authority bill. Madam President, we know that we live in a hurricane zone. And for the most part, we have been fortunate in that over the past century or so, we have not had many hurricanes that were really, really bad or devastating. In fact, I remember growing up as a child, and maybe this all comes from childhood ignorance, we used to look forward to when the tropical storms came through and the hurricanes, and it was a really, we enjoyed it, we had a good time as children, especially after it passed and we've gone and collected all the fruits and everything that has been knocked off the trees. But over time, we come to realize that hurricanes are in fact quite dangerous. And I remember hearing about the hurricanes that hit the Bahamas in 1929. There was a popular song by a Calypsonian, I think it was George Zimmerman, about that. And in 1932, and the devastation that both of these hurricanes brought about. But way back then, to me, Madam President, they were more like folk tales and far removed from any reality that I could conceive of. And then later on, there were others that came along that you took notice of. I remember some of the scarier ones being Hurricane Andrew in 1992, Hurricane Floyd in 1999, Francis and Jean in 2004, which really wreaked havoc on Grand Bahama particularly. Hurricane Joaquin in 2015, which hit the southern islands mostly. Matthew in 2016, which again hit the northern islands, including Grand Bahama. And Irma in 27, which hit us more centrally. And we still have some islands that are suffering the consequences of that. And Madam President, then there was Dorian. And after that, I think the whole concept of what hurricanes are about changed with Dorian. Madam President, Proverbs 27 and verse 10, verse 12 tells us, a prudent man foresees the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. And I saw somewhere where this Bible verse was paraphrased to say, a prudent man foresees the danger ahead and takes precautions, but the simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. Unfortunately, Madam President, when it comes to hurricanes in this country, we as a people have been closer to the side of the simpleton than to that of the prudent man. That is not to say that we have not done anything. Over time, our preparedness for and our responses to hurricanes and their potential to create disaster became more focused and more coordinated. We have tried on different levels over time to anticipate and address these disasters. But it appears to me that our efforts have been more reactive than proactive. If you remember, Madam President, after Hurricane Floyd in 1999, a recovery subcommittee was established to respond to such occurrences. And in June of 2004, the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, was established. And this was done just ahead of the onset of hurricanes Francis and Jean, which tore up Grand Bahama. NEMA was set up for the purpose of disaster management under the authority of the Cabinet. Its duties were listed as to prepare for and respond to national emergencies, and included in those duties were mitigation planning, community preparedness, public information, and recovery coordination. I did not see that reconstruction was part of NEMA's mandate, and I see that as a job really for the government. But, Madam President, none of us envisioned when NEMA was set up, or until now, that reconstruction, rebuilding would be a big part of our responsibilities as a country. Now, most, I think, in fact, all of our Caribbean counterparts have some sort of disaster management agency, which come under the umbrella of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agencies, established in 2005. And they all have different names. You see them throughout Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica. They all give them different names. And NEMA also comes under that umbrella. Madam President, I hear my colleagues saying we need to fix NEMA. But Madam President, I applaud NEMA for the work it did before, during, and after Hurricane Dorian. And their work continues up to today. If NEMA hadn't been in place to help us prepare, to organize shelters, to get people to evacuate, and to bring the relief immediately after the storm when so many people had no idea where to go or what to do. If it hadn't been for NEMA, the results might have been even more disastrous. And we might have had many more deaths than are recorded or expected or believed at this time. And Madam President, the work of NEMA, along with the work of the many, many volunteers, national and international agencies and donors, governments, police, defense force, all those people who came to our aid made such a difference to what happened in this country in last September. And I don't want to leave out those brave persons who came out in the middle of the storm to rescue people in imminent danger, people who did not listen when NEMA and the other government personnel were urging them to leave. But nevertheless, there were those who braved the storm to come out and assist. And I was very impressed, Madam President, with the jet ski operators. And I always had a problem with jet ski operators. I saw them as unruly, unregulated, rude boys who did pretty much what they wanted. Blocked up traffic when I was trying to get home. But Madam President, when I saw what they did in Grand Bahama, I have new respect for those young men. I think they should be applauded. But all of these people came together to mitigate the damage, the destruction, the loss of life that resulted from Hurricane Dorian. And without them, who knows where we would have been today. Now, Madam President, we have to deal with the aftermath, the cleanup, the rebuilding, the restoration. The bill before us today seeks to establish an authority, a body corporate with perpetual succession to oversee and manage reconstruction in any area designated a disaster zone. Reconstruction, Madam President, it's different from preparation and relief and all that. Reconstruction is another whole animal. And fortunately, not many countries, even in the world, have had to deal with reconstruction. The body that we establish today will be governed by a board of directors, and it shall control all funding given for the reconstruction efforts. This authority, Madam President, this authority will not replace NEMA, but it will work along with NEMA and will be responsible for work that, in my mind, is outside of NEMA's terms of reference. So I don't see where, Madam Speaker, Madam President, that creates any additional red tape or any confusion. I see this as an opportunity to coordinate, organize the effort, the reconstruction efforts in the country. I see this as an opportunity to get all of our various arms and agencies working together in a streamlined way so that they could be effective. I see this, in fact, as removing some of the red tape that can sometimes inhibit the efforts of government to bring relief and to move forward. Sections 8 through 11 of the bill sets out how finances of the authority will be dealt with. And we see that it will be responsible for preparing an annual budget, keeping proper records and accounts, and submitting audited financial statements to the minister under whose broad portfolio it falls within 3 months of each financial year. And you will note, Madam President, that the governing board of this agency will not be made up of politicians. And I think this will avoid political influence, undue political influence, and political mismanagement, political mischief that we've seen occur in the past when we had such, when there were monies for this kind of work to be done. It will avoid even the appearance, Madam President, of such kinds of mischief in the operation and work of the authority. Madam President, under Section 29 of the bill, the authority is given latitude it needs to carry out its work without direct interference from the minister, even though the minister may give general directions. And again, we talk about red tape. The more ministries are involved, the more red tape you have. But once those broad directions are given and this agency is allowed to function, I think we will see a lot of the red tape removed, and that those responsible for the rebuilding would get along with its work in an efficient manner. The establishment of this authority, to my mind, is timely and it's necessary. It would have been good if it had been established some time back and were up and running and ready to go now. But again, who would have anticipated that we would be in this position today? We need this agency to function efficiently and effectively. Madam President, we have a long road ahead of it. And there's no point in, we can't even think. We have to accept that it won't be easy. We have suffered a disaster, the likes of which I don't think any of us, even in our wildest nightmares, could have imagined. And we now have a chance to make things better. We could stand by, throw our hands up, wring our hands, while we lament the misfortune that came upon us, or we could stand up and face the reality of the situation and do the work that needs to be done to get us back to normalcy. I had an opportunity, Madam President, to look at a research paper that was written by one Lillian Pham, who is involved in humanitarian work around disasters. And the paper talks about disaster as opportunity. In fact, that is part of the title, Disaster as Opportunity, and it goes on, to say a little more. The underlying charge given in that paper was, when disasters happen and we have to rebuild, we ought to build back better. In the paper, the author quoted President Bill Clinton, who, in response to the recovery efforts around the tsunami in Southeast Asia some years ago, said that we have to make sure that this recovery process accomplishes more than just restoring what was there before. We cannot just look at putting back what was there, but our vision has to be broader. We have to look beyond that and see how we can do it better. And this is where we find ourselves at this time, Madam President. We have come through a disaster of unimaginable proportions. We have lost much. Most tragically, many, many precious lives. We have seen homes, public buildings, businesses all collapsed, flooded out, blown away. We have seen whole communities, almost a whole island, reduced to ashes. Disasters are terrible things, Madam President. And if we could control them, they would not happen. But they do happen. And as much as they inflict pain, they present us with new opportunities, which, if we embrace them, we will move higher than we were before. Madam President, we cannot waste such an opportunity. And I guess it made me somewhat religious because I'm going to go back to the Bible, Madam President. If you look at Isaiah 61, verse 3, it tells us, it says, to appoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. This is not only an opportunity, but I see here hope for people to elevate themselves and move beyond what we were before. This legislation before us today, Madam President, gives us the authority and the framework to move ahead and to do what we need to do as a nation to respond to the tragedy that was Dorian. And not only to Dorian, but to any other tragedy, any other disaster that comes along down the road. This is an ongoing agency. We are now presented with an opportunity to build back better. It's an opportunity, Madam President, to go and pull beauty from the ashes. This is a time when we all, as a country, as a people, no color, no politics, need to pull together and see what we can do to bring back Abaco, to bring back Grand Bahama, not to the glory that it was, but to move them above and beyond what they were and make them shining examples of what can happen when people work together to recover after bad times have hit. It is now up to us as a nation to embrace this unique opportunity presented to us. And it is up to us to honor all those who lost their lives in that tragedy by building back their communities better, by getting beauty from ashes. And with that, Madam President, I lend my full support to this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Senator. Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Renard Henfield.
Good morning, Madam President, Senate colleagues. It's always a pleasure to listen to Senator Dorset's contributions, and it's an honor to follow behind her. I've also listened to the Honorable Senator to my right, and I'm reminded of Proverbs 16:28. There's two versions. The Christian Standard Bible says, a contrary person spreads conflict. There's the NET Bible version that says, a perverse person spreads dissension. You know, Madam President, there's a quote along the lines that you never look good trying to make somebody else look bad. And there's another saying that sometimes people are jealous of you simply because your influence carries more weight than their family names and titles. Madam President, Hurricane Dorian, without any doubt, has been the worst thing, as Senator Dossett has said, to happen to many of our people in our lifetime. But it may very well be the best or the biggest impetus for us as national leaders to commit ourselves to moving forward with a national development plan that aligns with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. It may very well be the biggest impetus for us as national leaders to commit ourselves to being more innovative and transformative. And it may very well be the biggest impetus for us as national leaders to be more consultative and collaborative with all the stakeholders. And I've said on previous occasions, when I speak to stakeholders, I'm talking about academia, non-government organizations, local governments, and marginalized sectors of our community. Madam President, as I said on the last occasion during the previous debate, Japan is world-renowned for being the best prepared country on this planet for dealing with tsunamis or earthquakes. Yet they were devastated by their recent earthquake and tsunami. And we have visitors in the gallery today, and they, regardless of whichever country they may have come from, they would know the Bahamas has always been world-renowned for one of the countries and places in the world best constructed to withstand tropical storms. But yet, we were devastated just 9 weeks ago. So now more than ever, Madam President, climate change or unprecedented weather incidents, coupled with the unpredictability of the same, cannot be taken lightly. It cannot be taken lightly by our region, and it cannot be taken lightly by our people and country. Madam President, from where I sit now more than ever, we must, not we may or we should consider, but we must place tremendous emphasis on adaptation to climate change, to preparation for natural disasters, reconstruction, and as I said on the last occasion, we must consider resettlement strategies. Since 2015, Madam President, in light of those Sustainable Development Goals, many world leaders have committed themselves to being more consultative and collaborative, not just with their cabinet colleagues or parliamentary colleagues, but with that very same academia, private sector, the NGOs, and local governments that I speak of. You see, Madam President, transformative leaders have committed to consultation and collaboration with the various sectors of their electorate to make sure that they, as national leaders, don't forge ahead with national plans that will leave nationals exposed to dangers and casualties that could be prevented. When I look at the authority being debated today, this is exactly that being done. I've heard the senator to my right speak in opposition to the establishment of this authority. I've also heard a member in that other place, in opening his contributions, say or ask the question, why do we need the authority when we have local government? And if I can respond as to why we need this authority when we have local government, it's because local government is inadequate to respond to such disasters. It would be inadequate to respond to such disasters, especially as our local governments do not have the revenue-raising capacity. It doesn't have what this authority is putting in place, the ability to bring all stakeholders to the table to collaborate and make the decisions and move forward in the reconstruction of a community, to assist the persons who've been devastated in the reconstruction of their lives. When I was elected vice president of the Caribbean region back in March, Madam President, I've shared on so many occasions that I didn't wake up the next day any wiser than I was the day before. And I believe the same can be said to any of us as national leaders who are ministers or senators or members of parliament today. What I had to do was go the very next day and reach out to every national leader there and ask for their cell phone numbers so that I can reach out and consult and collaborate with them. You see, because as leaders, our job is to serve. You see, being a leader isn't about being in charge, it's about taking care of the people in your charge. One person said, the prime minister is the prime minister. What do we need the authority for? Everything starts and ends with the prime minister. You see, the prime minister we have isn't a dictator. The prime minister we have is putting together an authority to allow persons with experience to come together, work together to address national disasters. And that's what transformative leadership is about. I continuously share this, Madam President, because it is my hope that we as national leaders, regardless of the political party you may have aligned with, we have to put politics aside sometimes. We have to put our agendas aside sometimes. And I'm reminded of my colleague to the right's contributions earlier. While some may want to make a name for themselves, this is not the time. This is a time when we as national leaders should be getting involved rather than persons who've not been to Grand Bahama or Abaco and helped persons sitting down complaining about people who are there helping persons. And I have an issue with that. If your press release was coming from Grand Bahama where you were feeding and helping reconstruct people and your criticism, I could understand. But when you're sitting here in Nassau and you're critiquing people's efforts and sacrifice to help people rebuild their lives and communities, when you are not getting yourself involved in that reconstruction, I have a problem. Madam President, critics have said nothing has been done by this minister's administration, and nothing could be further from the truth. While I may not agree with everything every time, I will stand before anyone and state that a difference has been made for our people over the last 2 years. From where I sit, Senator Sweeting sits right to my right, so I know he can see what I see from where I sit. And while he can't say it, you see, I can say it for me and him. I can say it for me and him. Just smile now, the camera's on you, you don't have to get yourself in no trouble. I can speak for myself from where I sit, and I know Senator Sweeting sits just to my right, so he can see what I see. A difference is being made, Madam President. Madam President, I'm going to turn now to the bill for the establishment of the authority. And to put my contributions into perspective, I'm going to share the research of one Mr. Philippe, who did a release on the role of governments after national disasters. Mr. Philippe says in his research and study that governments have a history of being blamed for everything after there is a disaster. After there's a disaster, the government will be blamed for everything. And his study suggests two things a government is to do after a disaster. One, the first thing any government should do after a disaster is maintain law and order. And it's an action that a government can take that outweighs the costs. It's done so the people in that community or that island feel safe, and that the international organizations and the local organizations that render assistance in national disasters feel safe to send their people in. I can stand here today and say that the government did just that. It has coordinated from the beginning and is still coordinating to this day. It has maintained law and order, and as we have all stood in this place and in the other place, we have commended the many international organizations who have come to our aid from prior to the storm and who remain to this day. Clearly, the government has maintained law and order. The second thing Mr. Philippe says that a government must do after a national disaster is make public goods and services available, like search and rescue, which we know is being done or has been done, ensuring that its defense force is in place, which we know was done the moment the all clear was given. It's actions that outweigh the cost. But Mr. Philippe says there are things the government should not do. One is that the government should assume that the government is best suited for disaster relief. I hear my colleagues saying that is true. If we are to be honest with ourselves, neither side ran any candidate in the election whose portfolio and resume was that I traveled the world dealing with national disasters. So Mr. Philippe says governments must never get comfortable in thinking they are best qualified to deal with national disasters. So what this government has done and this authority has done, the previous bill and now this bill before us, it has opened the door for collaboration with the international organizations that are well experienced and versed in responding to national disasters. Secondly, the second point as to what governments should not do, and this is where I disagree with Mr. Philippe, is he says that governments should not engage in anything in which the cost outweighs the benefit. And his example was that governments should not engage in rebuilding disaster-stricken communities. And I disagree with that. If it's one thing I believe the government should also do is get involved in the reconstruction process. Like I've said before, when this hurricane devastated and traumatized our people, we can't set out simply to rebuild structures, but we have lives to rebuild. We have thousands of people who've been displaced, children who've been traumatized, parents who've watched their children swept to sea, children who've seen their parents swept to sea. We have lives and structures to rebuild. But Mr. Philippe pointed out that after Hurricane Katrina, FEMA spent some $1.3 billion on trailer parks for persons left homeless. And the trailer parks were so far out that millions of dollars had to be spent getting food and water to those trailer parks. I have agitated for and continue to agitate for the government to be consultative. And while I see that being done to this day, I would encourage the government to consider not only a disaster reconstruction authority, but at some point, an amendment to make this a disaster reconstruction and resettlement authority in the event there's a need to resettle persons and communities in the aftermath of another disaster. My only other constructive criticism, Madam President, is that there is a noticeable absence in Section 16 of how this disaster zone committee is to be constituted. By that I'm referring to and inquiring of who will make up the appointees to the disaster zone committee, which I believe all of us as parliamentarians would agree should be clear. You know, we all want expertise at the table. We want to know who the experts are that will be required to constitute the committee, who will be making the decisions or contributing to the decision-making process to help persons rebuild their lives and communities. And I believe that is crucial. And I would propose that the Senate include the composition of the Disaster Zone Committee to include local government, the island administrator, a building control inspector, a civil engineer, a structural engineer nominated by the Ministry of Works, a local representative from the utility companies, BPL, Water and Sewage, the Bahamas Telecommunications Company, a local member of the Chamber of Commerce, 2 members from the umbrella organizations, Civil Society Bahamas and ORG, a local representative of the Ministers of Health, Education, Environment, and Social Services, and representatives from the Defense Force, Royal Bahamas Police Force, Customs and Immigration. And I would also recommend that we include academia, the University of the Bahamas, and BTVI. I believe if we were to include in the legislation how that committee is to be constituted, it would demonstrate the administration's agreement that ministries are no longer able to operate in silos if we are to have true and substantial national development and progress. It would also solidify the administration's vow to be inclusive and collaborative. And it would demonstrate the administration's belief that academia, civil society, local government, and the private sector play a vital role in national development. Madam President, when this bill was debated in the other place, I indicated the other members' concerns and questioned why an authority when there's local government. I can only reiterate again that local government is not in the position to reconstruct any community in its present form. When he asks why there has to be a ministry overseeing the authority, This new authority will now have the opportunity, if we include the constitution of that committee, to pull everyone to one table, declare an area as a disaster zone, and then with all heads together at the table, determine the best way to help the affected persons rebuild their communities and lives without the red tape and bureaucracy, as it is a declared disaster zone under the control of an authority. I must say, Madam President, it's always disappointing to see other small island development states get it right while we in the Bahamas bicker amongst ourselves. Yes, the legislation could be better, but I am yet to see any legislation as an attorney that has been perfect. I believe that the pursuit of perfection often paralyzes progression. And I'm going to repeat that. The pursuit of perfection often paralyzes progression. If we were to sit back and wait for everything to be perfect, we'd get nothing done. And we must move. So while I may agitate for a disaster reconstruction and resettlement authority, to have just 9 weeks after a major national disaster, a disaster reconstruction authority, I believe we are off to a good start.
That's right.
But I refuse to see the government and our people paralyzed by the pursuit of perfection. As I wrap up, Madam President, during the time I've been permitted to speak in this Honorable Senate, I've spent 10 times as much time listening. And I've listened to brilliant minds share brilliant ideas with different perspectives on how best we can advance our nation. I look to the side opposite me today, and I see brilliant minds. I come on this side, absent today is Senator Knowles, another brilliant mind, always speaking up for the Family Island, Senator Dotson. I see Senator Thompson. I will skip over that seat next to Senator Thompson. I get down to the Vice President. And again, brilliant minds that always offer tremendous input to advance our country. Perhaps sometimes some amendments need to be made. Perhaps sometimes a certain position should be taken. And perhaps, just perhaps, we should put politics aside for a few months and focus on rebuilding lives and communities. Madam President, as I wrap up, I would like to remind everyone proudly that this is Deaf Awareness Month, and the Center for the Deaf has shirts on sale for $10. Shameless plug.
Okay.
But I will also remind the government and the public that to this day, the Center of the Deaf in 2019 still does not have a parcel of land to construct its school. The good book says may we remember the least among us. Secondly, I remind the legislative branch that these chambers and debates are not for persons who can walk and hear alone. There are no translators in these chambers, Madam President. Persons restricted to wheelchairs still cannot access these chambers. So those persons that are deaf or hard of hearing, or persons in wheelchair, are excluded from attending and listening to national debates on matters that affect them or that may fail to include them. I would also like to commend the Chief Justice for the consultative workshop he hosted on Monday at the Bar Association. Never in my 16 years as an attorney has a Chief Justice come down from court on a Monday, attended the Bar Association from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. to sit down with lawyers and say, what are your problems with the Supreme Court rules? How can we fix them? And set a fixed date for April 2020 when new rules will be put in place for the first time since 1978. So I will commend him for the consultative position he's taken. And I'd bring to the attention of the powers that be that there's a young man working at court, and I apologize for being late today, Madam President, as I was in court this morning. But there's a young man who works for the court system who pulled me aside. He makes $210 per week. He's a single father. And he has every morning to take the bus to drop his daughter to school, and then take a bus to get to work, then leave work, take a bus to pick up his daughter, and then bring his daughter back to work, and then take a bus home. He has to buy grocery, give her lunch money, and as we all know, the schools insist that you send the children with a fresh fruit snack. So in addition to him paying rent from this $840 per month, taking his child to school every day, putting lunch in her bag and fresh fruits. He has utilities to pay. He has to make sure this child gets her usual medical checkups. And I say all that to say a minimum wage must be a thing of the past during this administration. We must move to a livable wage. There's no way families or single parents can survive and raise healthy children with $840 per month. Finally, in conclusion, Madam President, this is the time of year that many of us in corporate Bahamas would reach out to the local hotels to book the venue to host our corporate parties. And I would encourage corporate Bahamas to take this time this year to do those corporate parties in Grand Bahama and Abaco. This is also a time of year that we as Bahamians travel for Christmas with our family and friends. I would encourage the wider citizenry to travel to Grand Bahama and Abaco this season so that we can go and assist those economies and those persons working in those islands who are out of work and provide some funds into those economies. So again, corporate Bahamas, as you look to book venues for your corporate parties, please consider Grand Bahama. There are venues. Please consider Abaco. There are venues. For those of you who are intending to travel and take thousands of dollars out of the jurisdiction, I would implore you and encourage you to take those thousands of dollars into Grand Bahama and Abaco as your families get together, your friends get together for the holiday season. So I think I've caused enough of a stir this morning, Madam President, in my interventions and my contributions. I again say, Madam President, it's a beautiful thing for you to remain calm when others expect you to be enraged. May God lift you up and bless you tenfold for your service and your sacrifice. And may He continue to bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I support the authority.
Thank you, Senator. The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jamal Moss.
Good morning, Madam President. I had no intentions of speaking, but probably just does remind me do what I have to do. But Madam President, I want to thank you for recognizing me here today as I give my contribution to this debate. I also want to thank God for health and strength, and also for allowing me here to also just to be in existence. But Madam President, I stand here very disappointed to hear a fellow young senator on the opposite side condemning the government for wanting to bring legislation in place that is going to cut down the historical red tape. I am also disappointed as a young senator in my colleague opposite. The one who on the right of the Senator Bernard Henfield. Only one spoke. But Madam President, like I said, my fellow Bahamians, I'm very disappointed that in 2019, after going through what we have experienced as a country, which none of us in our wildest dreams would have thought that we would have seen a day like this. Disappointed that the senator is showing exactly what I said last week, that the PLP is playing politics. The senator said that, and let me make sure I quote him. The misguided senator said that the government is making rookie mistakes and is moving very slow. These are the words of the Honorable Senator. Well, let me remind that Honorable Senator that on April 30th, 2017, the former Cabinet Minister, Shane Gibson, who was appointed by the former government, their body, as the hurricane czar, realized himself that the pace of which the work to providing assistance to individuals was moving slow. Mr. Gibson said, and I quote, that the system itself is just moving too slow for me. I would have thought that we would have been much further ahead. These are the words of a former PLP cabinet minister, Zah, who they appointed. Well, and that's a system. But she's saying we be making rookie mistakes and we moving slow. He further, yeah, listen, listen, listen. Selective memory, yes, selective amnesia. But you're playing politics. He also said, I am very disappointed in the technical team and how long it was taking to provide assistance. End quote. Madam President, this is what their own said. This is what a former cabinet minister, who was given sole responsibility, said. Clearly, this African government has learned from their mistakes and identify and let me say it again, Madam President. This African government who came into office after May 2017 and has experienced the worst hurricane ever recorded in this hemisphere's history, learned from their mistakes identified by the PLP, but it is very clear that the PLP itself, based on what I've heard today, didn't learn nothing. They're confused. And this is why I said last week, Madam President, that the PLP is playing politics with the lives of the Bahamian people. And the hypocrisy inside the PLP, when you thought it was bad or worse, I mean, it's just legendary now. But, I'm trying to call myself here today. But, Madam President, this bill is a proactive one. This bill, if passed, will give the government. Yeah, I mean, no, I say if because I just think no, it will pass. It will pass. But I'm just saying, but Madam President, this bill, when passed, will give the government the authority to create and establish a disaster reconstruction authority. This bill will allow the body to have the powers to facilitate the reconstruction of impacted areas in a disaster zone. This body will also have the authority to designate a special economic recovery zone, which will attract economic incentives to aid the recovery of the island economy. Now, Madam President, my fellow Bahamians asked the question, and those in the gallery, why would any sensible bunch would oppose something like this? Why would a sensible bunch bring speedy economic recovery to a devastated island? Why? I don't recall that being a sign of you care. I see that more as a sign of you just want to play politics. I could say you don't care, but I don't get no argument with nobody. But this government, Madam President, is moving forward. It is doing everything humanly it can to get these islands, which was hit by Hurricane Dorian, Grand Bahama, and Abaco, up and running as soon as possible. Why would we want to stop that? It hurts my heart to hear those opposite just want to oppose for opposing's sake and to have their 5 minute of headline or coverage in the media. It's just mind-boggling to me as a young person. No, my head is on right. I can tell you that. I got a question if yours is on right.
Okay, now we've been having a good day so far.
Yeah, but Madam President, the senator tried her very best to mislead the public that politics have a role in this body. But the bill that she has, and I have, and everyone has, makes it abundantly clear that while they may have to update a minister, they will in fact be making independent decisions as a body. So clearly, no politics will be involved. This authority will be given the power to exercise its discretion to accept non-governmental assistance. This authority will also be given the authority of the need for internal assistance, international assistance, and the list goes on. This board will be made up of this board will be made up of not more than 7 members who represents institutions and independent and non-political areas of our country, whose main focus is to help build a better Bahamas. The life of this board will not exceed 5 years. Madam President, the F&M government, which is known by the Bahamian people as the government of sunshine, is ensuring that transparency remains out of the day. This bill will ensure that every contract that will be made, that is being decided and agreed on, will be made public and gazetted in the media for all Bahamians, even those in opposition, to see how taxpayers' money will be spent and who is going to get the contracts. In Article 11 of this document, the Declaration of Interest, it says, a member of the board who is in any way, whether directly or indirectly, interested in a contract or a proposed contract with the authority that is the subject of consideration by the board shall declare the nature of his interest at the first meeting of the board, and which is practicable for him to do so, and shall recuse himself from voting therein. My fellow Bahamians, that alone shows transparency, and if I must say, decency. There's no politics involved. There's no underhand stuff going on or will be taking place according to this bill. The teeth is in this bill. And Madam President, I just want to say that I am proud of this government for the way how they're handling things. When you have world leaders such as Prince Charles, Senator Marco Rubio, the UN Secretary General, the President of the United States, the greatest country next to the Bahamas, all calling, and other world leaders calling our Prime Minister, congratulating him on the way how he's handling the effects of Dorian. That alone speaks volumes. That speaks to this government's genuine love for its people, and to do everything humanly possible to try bring some type of normalcy back to the lives of the Bahamian people. And Madam President, before I wrap up, I just want to say I want to commend the Prime Minister. I know you didn't expect this much when you got the job. I also want to commend my colleagues in the cabinet, who serve in cabinet. I don't serve in cabinet, but I want to commend my colleagues who serve in cabinet, especially Senator the Honorable Kwesi Thompson, the Minister of State responsible for Grand Bahama, who was one of those parliamentarians who had to ride out the storm, who himself, along with his team, occurred flooding at their command posts. I also want to commend my colleague, Minister Pintard, for the continued effort that he is doing in his constituency. And I want to commend all our MPs in Grand Bahama and also Nabucco for the work that they're doing. It shows leadership, Madam President. It shows leadership. And during this time, this is what leadership is all about. We've already seen what happened before with others, and we see what we have now. I just want to encourage the Bahamian people to continue to support this government, despite some things not moving as the way you may want it to be, but things are happening. I just want you to continue to support the government and avoid the naysayers. And Madam President, I just want to say I happily support this bill.
As many. Thank you, Senator. The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Clay Sweeting.
Thank you, Madam President. It's an honor to be here today to speak once again on behalf of the Bahamian people. I thank you, Senator Moss, for this campaign speech. I'm sure the Prime Minister heard him well. Well, before I get into the meat of the matter, to contribute to the Disaster Reconstruction Authority bill, I would like to take the opportunity to extend condolences on behalf of my family and my wife Delia, her son David, to the family of Frankie Simonet, who died tragically in a car accident Sunday past in Spanish Wells. He was a friend, a father, and he took pride in his job working for the St. George's Key Power Company on Spanish Wells. I extend my prayers to his family, especially to his 3-year-old daughter, his parents, and the entire community who mourns his loss. I would also like to extend condolences to the family of Susan Sawyer of Arbor Island, who contributed to the development of the Arbor Island community greatly. May their souls rest in peace and rise in glory. Madam President, having read the Disaster Reconstruction Authority Bill 2019, I am left confused and uncertain about the benefits of establishing this authority. Will this provide cushy jobs for cronies and paid board appointments? Madam President, there are many overlapping roles and responsibilities of other government agencies, and this bill does not, in my opinion, reduce the red tape in the event of a disaster, but seeks to add another layer of bureaucracy to an already overly bureaucratic system. Additionally, how does this authority differ from, or how does this authority and newly formed Ministry of Disaster work together to achieve the goals as set forth, or how are their roles different? Who is the authority in the event of a disaster? It seems that multiple agencies are being tasked with the same goals, over and over. I strongly oppose the establishment of this authority, and I cannot support the implementation of the same. Madam President, 2 months have passed since we have experienced the worst disaster to affect our country since 1992. 2 whole months has passed, and it is obvious that this government once again is devoid of ideas or seem to be scrolling through Facebook waiting for that ha-ha moment on how to govern effectively. 2 months have passed, and families that are displaced are still in need of housing assistance, employment wherever they are, immediate food supplies, and ongoing counseling. Families are still searching for their loved ones and seeking closure. The people affected by this storm have real and immediate needs. As I peruse this bill, I see no evidence, no future planning that gives the Bahamian people the guarantee or even a glimmer of hope that the needs of those affected by this disaster are alleviated by the passing of this bill. I find it incredibly difficult to rationalize the establishment of this authority when we have an already established agency in the presence of the National Emergency Management Agency, whose mandate and responsibilities are almost the same, and if not, the responsibilities can easily be adjusted to encompass those missing aspects as presented in this bill. Madam President, our current situation is dire. The people of the Bahamas are all feeling the aftermath of this disaster. Those that survived need help immediately. Should not the focus of this government be first to attending to the immediate needs of its people? The international community are reporting of the lack of organization that this government and relevant agencies and this new authority undoubtedly will add more to the frustration in this rebuilding process. While it is imperative to establish a plan to be implemented, should we experience such catastrophic events in the future, we ought to be focusing immediately on care and attention to the Bahamian people now. And we have the agencies already established, and they can provide the same. We simply need to channel the hurricane funds that have been donated to these agencies and implement a system of guidelines for its usage and a policy initiated to ensure compliance. Madam President, as I stated earlier, I strongly recommend that this government retract this bill and delegate the necessary powers to the ministries and National Emergency Management Agency. We are already paying the people within these agencies to complete this mandate. Simply adjust some of these responsibilities and fund them appropriately. In Part 2, Section 13, we see the use of government workers already in the system being seconded to this new authority. Is this not the same system that is currently being utilized by NEMA? As I said before, this bill seems to be another avenue for the government to provide cushy jobs for the board members, because at the end of the day, the people that will be engaged in completing the day-to-day work of the authority are already in the civil service and are already being utilized by NEMA. We see in Part 2, Section 12, subsection 1, that there is an unregulated concession made to this authority to hire, as it seems fit, employees for full or part-time employment at compensation levels to the determination of the board. This is a recipe for cronyism and impropriety at the highest level, with no accountability of public and donated funds. I draw your attention to Part 2, Section 3, subsection 1. Here we are establishing an authority to manage the reconstruction of an area after it is affected. As I said earlier, should we not be focused on, 1, immediate recover for those affected using the agencies already established, which has gotten the work done in the past without the implementation of new staff who are without experience? 2, should we not be putting appropriate teams in place to assess our vulnerabilities and implement suggestions to mitigate the same in the event of future disasters? Is it necessary to construct an entire authority to accomplish the work already mandated to government ministries. Madam President, I note with particular concerns Part 3, Section 21, subsections 1 and 2. How does the government compensate private landowners, be it individuals or businesses, once they have declared an area a disaster zone and implemented measures to prevent rebuilding? Is it not an infringement on the rights of the landowner? Also, when determining that landowners ought to be built to the specification of the authority in the noted disaster zone, is the authority responsible for the compensation to the landowner for architectural renderings and construction of such buildings as approved by the authority? Imagine paying over $100,000 for your property, building your dream home on your land to have it destroyed by a disaster. Imagine it being fully insured, or you having the means to rebuild it and told by the authority that 1, you cannot rebuild on your land, and 2, if you can rebuild on your land, the authority dictates to you what you can build. This is explicitly spelled out in this section, and it is egregious infringement on the rights of the landowner. I cannot support the enactment of this bill. Madam President, the government, through the establishment of this authority, is setting itself for internal conflict. Under Part 5, Section 30, subsection 2, we see what should be a separation of donated funds between the authority and NEMA, where there seeks to be a distinction between funds donated for relief efforts versus funds donated for reconstruction. Who determines the use of such funds when both organizations have the right to solicit international and domestic donations? How does the donor know which organization is responsible for what and which organization needs the funds more? Madam President, this bill does not clearly define the structure for donation of funds and the use of the same. Madam President, I concur with my colleague, the Honorable I. Chester Cooper, in recommending that these delegated powers be turned over to NEMA as the agency is already established. If we find that the system is broken, we should fix it, not reinvent the wheel. This bill and enactment of the authority for the purpose of reconstruction is a waste of public funds, taxpayer dollars, and donations received. We already have a vehicle in place for relief. We simply need to channel the funding being allocated to the authority to NEMA, add additional staffing, extend the powers of NEMA, and continue moving forward, upward, and onward. Madam President, the side opposite keeps screaming about being non-political and going back and forth on this. But Madam President, the people in Abacoa and Grand Bahama are screaming for the government to do something. So we are just speaking on their behalf. The fact of the matter is the FNM is the government. The fact of the matter is that it has been 2 months since Hurricane Dorian has wreaked havoc in Abacoa and Grand Bahama, and people are hurting. Stay focused. The government shouldn't have no time to do anything but to elevate Abacoa and Grand Bahama to its rebuilding stage so they can rebuild their economy, rebuild their homes, and become more industrious than ever. Stay focused. It is time to roll up your sleeves and just get it done. If we feel it is a good thing on the side, we will support it. We don't mind taking a holistic approach, but red tape doesn't help the people of Abacoa and Grand Bahama. Our fellow Bahamians are counting on this government to make the right decisions that are in the best interest of the people. I would like to echo again what I said on Monday, last week when I spoke, that we have an opportunity to rebuild Abacoa, we have an opportunity to rebuild Grand Bahama, we have an opportunity to build the Northern Bahamas from the ground up. Madam President, thank you, God bless you, and God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Dion Folks.
I don't need it. No, Madam President, thank you. In wrapping up this debate, first of all, I'd like to express on behalf of all government senators our disappointment that the side opposite is not supporting this vital bill for the reconstruction of two of our islands that were devastated. It is very, very, very unfortunate that they have adopted this position. One of the main things that has come out of the debate this morning is the difference between the responsibilities and purposes of NEMA versus the authority. And I just want to be clear. NEMA's role will remain what it is today, which is basically preparation to do all those things before a disaster to ensure that our citizens are properly prepared, response immediately after a disaster occurs, and relief immediately after a disaster occurs. The authority deals with reconstruction and reconstruction only. And both, I don't know whether the side opposite did not read the bill, the functions of the authority. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's 10 separate functions. And all of them deal with reconstruction, which is totally different from the function of NEMA. So there's no conflict between the role of the authority and the role of NEMA. NEMA's doing an excellent job. Captain Russell and his team down at NEMA, they're doing an excellent job now. What we are lacking is the holistic approach to short-term, medium-term, and long-term reconstruction. And that is what this authority does. Senator Thompson mentioned to me earlier that this is synonymous to urban renewal. For example, when urban renewal was introduced, it pulled in different ministries and different agencies under one umbrella to service the needs of certain communities. This accomplishes the same thing. And that is the difference between the mandate of NEMA and the mandate of the authority. Probably in terms of its structure, it would be similar to how PAJ, the Public Hospital Authority, is structured. The Airport Authority is structured from a management, employment, and from a financial point of view. They all operate the same. The boards will be independent. The management of the authority will report to the board. The overall jurisdiction falls under a minister, which means cabinet. So that's basically how this authority is structured. So Madam President, I too want to join all the other senators to thank you for the role that you played in, specifically in Grand Bahama, during a time of great need, during a time of despair, massive loss to many Grand Bahamians. And you did it voluntarily, on your own time, without compensation. And Madam President, from the bottom of my heart, and I'm sure all the senators agree that you are fully deserving of all the compliments of all of us, and indeed the nation. I also want to say thank you to all of the parliamentarians, the cabinet ministers, the MPs, and the senators who represent or live on both in Grand Bahama and in Abaco. This whole period, even today, and probably for the next several months and maybe years to come, they have provided invaluable assistance and leadership on the two affected islands. And they made a big difference in terms of their presence there. And I also want to thank them. Here in the Senate is Senator Thompson and Senator Darius, who were the two senators from Grand Bahama. So, Madam President, with those few words, I'd like to recommend this bill for the full approval of the Senate, and I will entreat there's still time, our two colleagues opposite not to make a big mistake, not to make a big historical mistake by not supporting the establishment of this authority. Be on the right side of history.
For a change.
For a change. Thank you. Thank you, Madam. Yeah, Madam. Yeah, Madam President, I wish to move a motion that the 12:54 that the business of the Senate do continue beyond the 1 o'clock hour.
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate move beyond 1 o'clock. All those in favor would say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The business of the Senate will continue beyond 1 p.m. No. As many as. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a body corporate to be known as the Disaster Reconstruction Authority, for the functions and powers relating to that authority, for the designation of a disaster zone and a special economic recovery zone, and for connected purposes, or matters rather. As many as are in favor would say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a second time and committed. Further second reading and committal of bills.
No, Madam President. Madam President, I now move that the Senate resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole and that Senator Dossett takes the chair. Madam President, I wish to withdraw that motion and to now move that the Senate resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole and that the Vice President now takes the chair.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that the Senate resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole with the Vice President in the chair. All those in favor would say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The Vice President will now take the chair.
Madam Chairman, I move that a bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a body corporate to be known as the Disaster Reconstruction Authority, for the functions and powers relating to that authority, for the designation of the disaster zone and a special economic recovery zone, and for all connected matters be agreed. I move that this long title be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a body corporate to be known as the Disaster Reconstruction Authority, for the functions and powers relating to that authority, for the designation of a disaster zone and a special economic recovery zone, and for connected matters. All those in favor? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. Let the long title of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chairman, I now move that the short title of the bill be agreed.
Second, Madam.
It has been moved and seconded that the short title of the bill be agreed. Short title and commencement. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The short title of the bill is agreed.
No, you are already on the wrong side of this one. Madam Chair, I move that sections 1 to sections 1 to 31 and the schedule be agreed.
Second.
Section 2. Hold on. Section. Yeah, from interpretation. Section 2 to section. So to make section 31. Section 31 be agreed, and the schedule.
I second, Madam.
It has been moved and seconded that the section 2 through 31 and the schedule be agreed. Those in favor? Aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Section 2 through 31 and the schedule is agreed.
Madam Chairman, I move that the bill be agreed in its entirety.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety be agreed. Those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The bill in its entirety is agreed.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I now move that the president resumes the chair.
You second it? Oh. It has been moved and seconded that the president resume the chair. All those in favor, aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The president to resume the chair. Madam President, the Committee of the Whole has met. We have reviewed the bill, and it has been agreed that the bill in its entirety is agreed. Honorable Senators, the Vice President and Chairman of the Committee of the Senate has reported that the committee has gone through the bills and has made no amendments thereto. Third reading and passing.
Yes, Madam President, I move third reading and passing of a bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a body corporate to be known as the Disaster Reconstruction Authority for the functions and powers relating to that authority, for the designation of a disaster zone and a special economic recovery zone, and for connected matters.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed. A bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a body corporate to be known as the Disaster Reconstruction Authority for the functions and powers relating to that authority, for the designation of a disaster zone and a special economic recovery zone, and for connected matters. As many as are in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a third time and pass. Order that this bill do now pass and the title thereof declared to be Disaster Reconstruction Authority Act 2019.
No, Madam President.
Well, I haven't
you
asked.
Okay.
For the third reading,
No, Madam President.
consideration of House amendments, resolutions, discharge of select committees, notices for future meetings.
Madam President, I wish to renew all the notices in the name of the government and to also give notice that we intend to adjourn sine die.
Madam President, I wish to renew all notices in the name of the opposition.
Orders for the clerk, adjournment.
Madam President, I move that the business of the Senate stands adjourned sine die.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate adjourn sine die. All those in favor would say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The Senate stands adjourned sine die.